Hi everyone. That's a great stable audience that keeps staying to listen more and learn more. And that's probably because you've already been speaking a lot about the topics, and I know how well it will be to hear even more from you. So maybe as a reminder, if each of you would tell a bit about yourself, about your project, your vision, but in a way that would ideally describe you 3 years from now. So if you go and you succeed, how the world with your product, with your project looks in 3 years, well, or maybe like simply extend the product success now.
Yeah, happy to start. So Brendan from Masa. I'm the technical co-founder. I've been in the crypto space since early 2013. My financial freedom was gained from mining Doge, some of the first blocks. That's kind of what I say to people. Built several distributed networks over my career, including delivering credit scores to emerging markets using machine learning and large kind of distributed learning models. And at Masa, we're building a decentralized data network where we aggregate and combine data sets at scale, typically publicly available information, but at times and very frequently data that's behind closed walls. Twitter being the strongest example of that, which is actually our biggest used data set. And we believe that the world is going to be better by having open, transparent, fair, and permissionless data for anyone to build AI applications. I think from a bias perspective and open model perspective and education perspective, being able to give people like tools to learn, a notion of like fair access to this data layer is critical. So that's what we do.
Hey everyone, I'm Ben, co-founder of Gensyn. My background personally is in machine learning research. Reasonably new to the decentralization crypto space. Moved into it for technical reasons with Gensyn 4 years ago. And Gensyn, we're building the network for machine intelligence. If I kind of phrase that in the sort of 3-year context, the situation we'd like to have in 3 years is that machine learning, when it's done either by humans or we think much more by machines themselves in 3 years' time, the core resources for that machine learning work will just be programmatically accessible. You won't have this situation where right now, if I want to access compute, for example, as the kind of main focus that we have for the mission of the company, I have to go and find a data center or I have to find a cloud provider and I have to rent time on the hardware that they have. But realistically, I just want access to machine learning operations. And that's kind of, that could be a commodity, but it isn't right now for various kind of technical and sort of commercial reasons. And the goal of Gensyn is to make that just a programmatic commodity. So if I want to train a machine learning model, I don't think about how many devices I've got. I don't think about how I spread the model of those devices. I think about, here's the model I want to build. Can I get the ops out there in the world to do it? And Gensyn will kind of handle all of that at the protocol layer, take a model, split it up, distribute it over whatever compute you need. Maybe that's in a data center, but maybe it's our MacBooks or even long-term our iPhones. It doesn't really matter what the compute is. If it can do ML ops, it can be part of this kind of resource network. And I think the same can be true of the other core resources of machine learning, like data, like human knowledge, etc.
Awesome. My name is Whitney. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Ringfence. Ringfence builds data governance and authentication software. Our recent launch is Escher, a creator platform that we've built in collaboration with Leonardo AI. And the goal of Escher is to increase the efficiency and distribution of content and help to further the benefits of user-owned AI through the platform itself. So we have been working intently on Escher for the last year and a half. We recently released just a week or so ago. We've had over 140,000 content creators sign up for the platform, and we're excited. It's we act at Escher as kind of a top of funnel for a lot of the others that you'll hear on stage today. Essentially, we believe that the service that Masa provides is invaluable, and other companies like Vana, and we just want to be there to help people start to feed more data into the machine that can then be extracted and monetized and provide more value to those who are originating that data.
Hey guys, again, I'm Jonathan of Exabits, and our sort of long-term or short-term 3-year goal is to ensure that the decentralized compute space is a possibility, right? So we're working with some of our partners, Hyperbolic, who you just saw Jasper speak, Greg Vakash, who's one of our close partners, and what we want to see is more access to building an AI. Gensyn, I think they'll really push and make compute and ML models more accessible to everyone. And I think for Exabits, we want to help supply a bunch of these marketplaces for them to find their own customers as well. And in the future, we want sort of to make a dent in this space that's run by incumbents right now.
Amazing. Okay, so I feel 3 years from now, and you all collaborate, actually, building all of this amazing future ahead. And then it means that you have to partner, you have to build some interfaces to collaborate, to integrate the systems. And do you see already some standards, some emerging standards, the way you talk to other projects? Will those standards appear and maybe be designed by AI? How do you envision that? Maybe starting over here.
Yeah, I think like everything else that we've seen currently in protocols with like the different standards that Ethereum is coming out with, some things that are like EVM compatible. I think the standards is super important for AI to not only speak with each other through different protocols, but also you've seen in Jasper's slide all the different partners that he sees. We just want everything to be as interoperable as possible, right? The more you bring in human-centric AI models and then more on the agent side models, there has to be standards in this industry.
So you mentioned blockchain. You think that blockchain will be part of that standard making layer for the solution?
Yeah. The blockchain component for me is sort of the notoriety and sort of the tracking of history that proof of work, proof of compute. That's sort of the component that I think is super important in this part.
I see. Whitney?
So I think the current fragmentation in Web3 is laughable. All of us have spent the last week bouncing between 800 side events. And really when we think about interoperability and how everything in this space ties in, the user doesn't care, right? If you're providing a good user experience, the tech stack is behind the scenes, right? Like when I use an app on my phone, I'm not really digging into how it's running. I just care that it provides me the service or the benefit that I'm looking for from that application. We have the benefit at Escher of really focusing on the user-facing application and how they are going to benefit. And we get to partner with people who are providing amazing pieces of the tech stack. And really, we don't need to go out and make these big splashy partnership announcements, because if we do our job right, then they'll get the benefit of doing or utilizing other players within the space without knowing it, right? So then they just get to subscribe to a great service, have a delightful application experience, and receive constant benefits.
I strongly agree with the kind of partnership point. It's the same for us at Gensyn. We're happy to collaborate with people, but we don't see a huge amount of value in kind of doing these announcements. So we sort of, the work together and figuring out how things actually interconnect is really valuable, but I don't know about the kind of announcements as you mentioned. I think standardization to me is very similar to what you said. The market's looking for this like solution problem fit, and that it happens on a short term where somebody just, if the problem hasn't been solved yet and somebody comes out with a solution, that solution, the kind of quality of it doesn't matter too much because it's important. But then over a period of time, you get this kind of quality assessment process where maybe somebody comes out with a solution which is so much higher quality or so much kind of more efficient that it sort of takes over, and at some point there's diminishing returns to that and you settle with that kind of solution. And that's what we're expecting to happen on the standardization front. Basically, that process will happen over the next like 18 months, maybe a little bit longer, and we'll figure out what it is that the market wants from interaction with these protocols and this tech, and what the market wants will drive how we all interact as protocols. So to an extent, we could all kind of sit down together and say, this is exactly how it should integrate, and then we could ship something and the market would hate it. And actually something would emerge, which is a much better way of like interconnecting protocols and products. And so our attitude is kind of let that process happen, like see what comes out from that solution problem fit that will just happen as we kind of let the market mature, because it is very early, frankly.
Yeah, I think we've got to be really careful that we don't repeat the past mistakes of the last 10 years. And that's selling to each other continuously through cycles and thinking that the air in this room is rarefied. Building standards between us don't get us there. I think the lowest hanging fruit, and I'm going to be honest with everyone here, like we have a live token. We do announcements for announcements' sake because we have a live token. So that is one thing that you do if you know how to play the game. But then you have, like, what are you really doing with the other 99% of your time? Because that should really only be 1%, and that 1% should be very loud because you need it to, like, fuel your economics. In that other 99%, you need to be dealing with, I think, the incumbents, and you need to be making a deal with the devil, because they are still the ones that have the keys to the kingdom. So we're working with a really big cloud provider right now. We're going live with them around 4 weeks. And we are pattern matching our data contracts, all of our standards, the way that we're structuring data to that cloud provider, because that is what's going to really drive usage of us and will broadly validate that the work that we're doing here every day and what we're talking about for 5 days here in Singapore actually means something.
So 18 months for standards, 3 years for the great future, working together, and many partners that all of you work with, and you mentioned them on stage and you talk about them. When you think about your partners delivering some critical pieces of technology, can you name a few that you think are the ones that you wait the most for, that will move you forward the most if all of this starts working?
Yeah, those that have product market fit. And if we look at ourselves really critically, none of us have product market fit. So the signal we get from selling to each other is a very noisy, very flimsy signal. And the only signal that we get is by delivering product to a partner or a customer that's got, hundreds of millions of end users. Like, it's just not simply good enough getting 10,000 users now. It's simply not good enough moving fast. You have to move fucking fast, because Web 2 AI is going at a speed that we can't even comprehend. And changes so quickly. Like, 1 minute you have a valuable product, the next minute OpenAI blows you out of the water. So you've got to really focus on just nailing one, I think, big use case, big partner. Like, forget use case, just one partner that's got a lot of users and really kind of growing with them and scaling into that partner.
I think to an extent it depends on the type of business you're building, right? What is it that you're trying to achieve? So from our perspective, we have a very clear view of the world we want to kind of see exist. And we have a very clear view of how to build that. So our kind of problem isn't necessarily, can we sort of nail the market? Can we find the existing customers of someone else in the Web 2 world? And can we like steal those customers by sort of like mimicking the way that the offering currently exists? Our problem is, can we build this incredibly hard tech that creates this new kind of version of the world? And then the bet that you're kind of making there is that that vision of the world is actually better and is actually kind of viable out there in the market. It's very hard to test that without kind of building it. And you can do the iterative approach of trying to start with how things currently are and then sort of slide your solution in and gradually replace it until you've got yours behind it. Or you can just go hard and say, we just believe in this thing. We're just going to build this like this, and the bet we're making is that it works and it's better, and we don't have to take that kind of iterative approach where you sacrifice some of the deeper portions by doing that. It makes it harder as a business to build those deeper portions because part of your kind of mind as a business is distracted with trying to kind of mimic an incumbent or sort of work with them instead of just saying, laser focused on what we want to do. We're just going to build this thing. We think it's the right thing to build. Let's do it.
But that's coming from the perspective you've got infinite time and money. If you don't have those two things, then you could be building a lot for a long time that then never sticks. It's like the YC method or this. Where have we seen this work?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be able to fund it, right? And I think an example of it working, the success signal's a hard one to kind of attach to, because over what timeline are we talking about success? Like, something might look like a success now, and then like 2 years' time, actually something else is a bigger success, and it wasn't a success at all. But you look at like OpenAI, for example, you take $2 billion and you kind of disappear underground and do fundamental research to build a model that you can show to the world and say, hey, this thing's pretty fucking impressive, frankly. And so I think those kinds of businesses, there's similar kind of on the embodied robot side, like the hardware side, where it just takes a lot of deep investment before you can build something like this. It's the kind of typical sort of moonshot approach versus that more iterative approach. It does depend on there being a source of capital, though.
Yeah, for us, when we think about the critical partnerships for Escher, Near, obviously a shout out to them. They've been very critical to what we have built in providing a certain kind of experience to the Escher user. On a more speculative side, Stories programmable IP, I think, has a ton of potential, and we're excited to work with them to see how they fare. Obviously, they've got a lot of favorable wins behind them, I will say, that have been great for us to draft off of. But really, what we look most forward to is the continuation of the attention economy. As long as there's a new batch of 18-year-olds every year that want to become Twitter famous, we feel we've got a good chance at getting solid product market fit and capturing a percentage of that market share. So that's really what we're looking at. It's certainly everything comes down to capital when you have a startup, and as a startup that has not went out and tried to raise hundreds of millions of dollars and been very frugal with how we were building, we've always been focused first on how can we get to the fastest path to profit, and that's partially because we feel like we're building something that doesn't require a ton of capital to do, and we can quickly get to customers and provide them with a meaningful benefit without the need of continually raising. And we're focused on leveraging the existing ecosystem and the desires that people currently have to provide them a solution that they're looking for in a fast amount of time.
From our perspective, what we're really offering is just straight compute, right? How can you do training and inference on our GPUs? But then that's also has been a limiting factor for us, right? So how can we really compete against AWS or all these large incumbents who have like the full suite of tools that you would need? And that's going back to the previous question. That's why we really need those standards and interoperability within this ecosystem. For us to scale that, there has to be different incentive mechanisms to make us sustainable as a business and also scale that really largely. So those are the two things that we would want to see next.
So almost yourself, you say that this lack of permissionlessness in access, connecting with the largest partners is a challenge. So when we say about open source AI, do we mean just open source? Do we mean also the blockchain aspects, permissionlessness, decentralization? Which of those properties are the most important, the way you build things and the way you imagine and envision things?
So our sort of perspective was never on decentralized contribution of compute. We are thinking of it as a way of decentralized contribution of your personal resources to fuel compute. What that means is you get a stake and directly into quote unquote decentralized NVIDIA or decentralized AWS. That's how we want to approach it. And we think that through blockchain technologies and the Web3 incentive mechanisms is our way to contribute to the growth of the ecosystem.
So open source, I mean, we named our company Ringfence, which by definition is a closed loop, right? So we are focused on helping people protect the data that they want to protect. And we do believe that there is benefits in open source. I think that oftentimes open source it's a nice ethos to have, but it's very hard when you're trying to build a profitable business to focus on only providing open source solutions. I do think that there are great open source solutions that you can leverage as you're building your business to then fine tune and level up and create something that is then closed source to you or proprietary that you can monetize. And we've seen this with OpenAI, who is far from open at this point, and then Grok, right? Grok was famously open source before Elon decided to figure out how to make some money to pay back the $44 billion that he spent on Twitter. So yeah, I mean, when it comes to decentralization, if you're in Web3, decentralization is a very critical point, and I think Ben and Brendan are probably best to speak on this based on what they're building, but there are a ton of risks that come from centralization. And when we are thinking about decentralization, whether it's on-chain inference or model hosting or some of these other novel technologies that are coming up, there are certainly benefits that decentralization will bring to the space, although I do not believe yet that we are at a place where you can fully leverage a lot of those for the building of a business.
So we at Gensyn, we pretty strongly believe in technical and therefore like just general human progress. That's what we want to see happen, and machine learning is the kind of in our view the next like technical revolution. It's the next thing that takes humanity to a kind of new stage, and what we care about is getting there as like efficiently as possible at the maximum scale we possibly can. And so then when you think about the kind of things required to get there, and there's a bunch of resources underneath, and we focus on compute right now very kind of deliberately because we think it's the most constrained, but in many ways you can see like human attention and human effort, human design of kind of software and of fundamental kind of even mathematical principles as another resource. And decentralization allows us to theoretically, with careful protocol design, infinitely scale those resources and get the kind of most efficient access to those resources to as much of the world as possible. And so open source to us, it's kind of like a protocol, right? It exposes the kind of maximum amount of human attention and human ability to a problem. If you do it in the closed source way, you're essentially taking the resource, every human on the planet, and you're saying, okay, I'm only going to use a subset of this because that subset wants to kind of be enriched. Whereas in the open source world, you can say, well, all of these people can contribute in that way. And same for compute, same for data, et cetera. Like all of these kind of resources sit underneath. So I view open source in a similar way as to I view building a compute protocol. Essentially, we're trying to maximize our efficient usage of all of the resources of the world to bring us into that kind of machine intelligence future where we have just accelerated human progress, particularly on kind of like knowledge topics.
Yeah, I love what everyone's saying here, actually. I think open source and blockchain are honestly two quite different things from my perspective. I feel like everybody in the space has the same vision, that there is a way of constructing an incentive mechanism and economic model that benefits the many, not the few. Unfortunately, when you look at how this plays out in many of the blockchain-based ecosystems, for example, BitTensor is a good one to compare this to, Bitcoin is another, you still end up finding that the miners or the contributors trend towards a form of centralization of bigger players. So how do you, in this kind of paradigm, continue to make space for smaller players? I really hope we can crack that nut. But with open source, just going back to some comments we had here, you know, obviously Linux is one of the biggest examples of this. Like, you really can build a huge community of contributors that are very passionate and extremely intelligent around a very big problem, but you have to build business units around it to kind of carry it to market. So what does that look like? I don't think I have a good answer for what we're talking about here, to be honest with you. There's a lot of like open source inference models. If you go onto like the Reddit local llama, there's one of the most vibrant communities you'll find of people running GPU clusters, customized models, quantized models, distilled down models. These are people that aren't even in the crypto space. These are people that are just purely motivated on innovating for no financial gain. When you align that mentality with a hard problem, you get exponentially amazing outcomes. And that comes from open source. I fear that in Web3, the money side of it, which, if we're all honest with ourselves, is easy in this space, can dilute and distract from the brilliance we can create together.
Nice. So you say about reaching to the open source community for the models, for the innovation. And on the other side, we've heard about trying to break through to the large operators for accessing their compute power. So coming back from this like vision far ahead or the set of values, what would be the day-to-day struggles to increase the liquidity? So anything, liquidity data and with data and compute. So you have to bring that liquidity to your blockchains, to your solutions, give it to the users. And I guess lots of challenges. You were saying, give me partners with product market fit, bring me those users. Is it chicken and egg problem? Is that users will actually justify bringing liquidity, the providers will come to users? Or is it the other way around? You already mentioned a few, but maybe if you expand on those topics, like the very day-to-day actions. Yeah,
the majority of us are building two-sided marketplaces in Web3. The hardest thing you can build is a two-sided marketplace. If you go into traditional venture, you won't get funded for a two-sided marketplace today because it's too difficult and you're going to run out of money before you get to the end point. We bootstrap that by using these incentives. So we have there is a cost of building one side of the market, which is giving away an asset that is for the communal shared good of the protocol, whether that's a token or a digital asset that is then governed by all holders in that initial bootstrap phase. And I think distributing and using that in an effective way is one of the hardest problems that we face in the space. So it's one of the hardest problems that I've dealt with in all the systems that I've built. Do not have it figured out. I think it's a massive problem. And yeah, building the first side of the supply is one thing, and then getting it used is another, and there's a lot of challenges there.
I think this space broadly is incredibly impatient, and it drives us to like try and bootstrap to this like ridiculous degree to try and like explode onto the scene. And realistically, through all of this, what we're all actually looking for, if we have a long-term view, is true value exchange. Like somebody actually wants to buy something. Somebody like, not because they want to enrich themselves, but because they actually want to exchange goods in some way. And so our view is basically, you just provide an efficient way of doing that. And maybe it's not fast. Like you don't explode onto the scene and you've kind of got all the supply in the world and then you're scrapping around trying to look for demand whilst inflating your token until you kind of explode in the sun. Actually, you're just providing a real value exchange between someone on the supply side and somebody on the demand side, and that might only be two people. But if it's real, then through time you can grow that into an actual, real, persistent product rather than kind of waiting and hoping that by bootstrapping one side as hard as possible, the other side will kind of come in time before you run out of money.
I always wonder what would happen if Web3 projects had to do a roadshow before listing a token, right? Like if you had to go to a bank and have them set your valuation and then have liquidity providers ready to buy your token on listing, like how would that change the way that you structure incentives? And we've started to think more about that because I think that if you take an approach that's similar to TradFi, even though love it or hate it, it is what it is. You can then structure incentives in a way that can help you to bootstrap the initial users while working towards ensuring ongoing incentives after a token lists. Because right now, what most people face is that you can get some initial users by baiting them with an airdrop or baiting them with token incentives or points or whatever the case may be. But the minute that those tokens can be dumped, they are, and your users that you have spent time bootstrapping through these incentives are gone forever. But I think that, especially when we talk about user-owned AI, there need to be ongoing rewards. There need to be ongoing benefits. There needs to be something that translates into tangible value for the users in perpetuity. And the only way that you can do that is to continue to view these people as long-term shareholders, and by shipping consistently valuable products that they not only can have, the speculative value of the token, but that they can see daily or monthly ongoing value from through the rewards that you're able to provide to them.
Yep. I remember one of our VCs asked me, are you ever going to be a two-sided marketplace? And then my answer to that was a hard no, because we've seen a lot of players in the decentralized compute space specifically essentially have their responsibility to satisfy one side of the market, which is the contributors of compute. And the problem there was that, okay, you can easily be saturated with hundreds of thousands of people saying they have X, Y, and Z compute. When you look under the hood, it's a lot of massed compute saying that, okay, we tried workloads on one of our competitors and it was pointing to Cloudflare. So it's not really decentralized compute. And then a lot of these, and then we're asking, what's your solution to this? And it's like, oh, we can't because it's already out there. We can try to track IP addresses, but that's impossible when you have thousands, if not millions, of compute providers providing that. And you have the responsibility of essentially compensating them, right? So my answer to that was no, because it's beholden to people who are in it for the wrong incentives, right? So that's why as our team, our team is built by a bunch of nerds, right? Like PhD guys whose hypothesis was, okay, decentralized compute, how can we prove our hypothesis in the market by generating revenue with enterprise companies? And that's been our approach, as opposed to some of the other companies who have taken a marketing approach to crypto instead of the builder approach that us and some of our partners here are trying to do right by crypto.
So that's a super good stories. But and I'm thinking going historically back to what we all dealt with for many years. So we almost used to the pushback in the community, like among crypto people. So first, like the export controls on cryptography, like fight against our own fight for disruption of whether it's financial markets or governance. And very often we were mostly dealing with the markets that already pre-existed, right? Like with the government structures, with the financial markets. And now we have this, sure, I mean, data and compute understood generically, they existed for many years, but the AI market is something that is being born, and the regulation hits the AI market, and it also probably will look even stronger on the decentralized AI. And what kind of pushback have you already seen in the industry, and what more of the pushback you expect, like those controls of the data centers not being allowed to traverse the borders, or data privacy concerns, the training models, like the situation with Europe now when we see the rollout of the devices. Think about your products and think about also the industry that you're looking at, and what can we expect, what we've already seen.
The biggest problem that we have is that we don't have enough geolocated partners, right? So we did an event yesterday with one of our data center partners close to the airport, and we showed our investors and our partners H100s, right? And then we had partners that come from Korea, and they're like, do you have a data center in Korea? Because our LLM model, we don't want it to leave the country, right, as far as processing. And that was our limitation right now. So I think in the future, if we address that, more and more enterprises will be able to assimilate and work with us.
Simply put, for us, the thing that is top of mind for us is GDPR. America doesn't really have any data standards, so I'm kidding, there's some, but you know, we base everything that we're doing on GDPR to make sure that we are always looking out for the consumer's best interests. You know, that's critical to our business as a whole, whether or not there were such regulations, but we think that over the course of time, it's going to continue to grow. We're seeing now Micah and others that are popping into the space that impact the way that cryptocurrencies and digital assets are treated, but those are not yet a tremendous focus for us.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of conversations on the regulation of sort of just AI as a technology right now. I think that generally comes from kind of like two areas. One, which is unfortunately easily the smallest in my opinion, is actual concern for like citizens in this situation, like concern that there's going to be maybe kind of like capture of mind shares, like censorship. There's going to be general kind of control of what a sort of consumer can actually do that goes against what is in the consumer's best interests. And I think that's where kind of regulation a lot of the time originates. But unfortunately, the much larger side, I think, is commercial, where certain businesses see great value in regulations being drafted in a certain way that benefits them and doesn't necessarily benefit their competitors. And I think we're in this kind of situation right now where there is some general concern for consumers. I think if we look at AI, you can map it very closely to like what happened with social media, where we let the kind of main means of communication that we all use, the town square itself, get captured by a very small number of companies who have outsized control over the censorship of discussion in that town square. And we probably all agree that that's not necessarily the best way of doing things. The same thing could happen with AI. If a single company manages to capture it, that gets even deeper into our brains because we're interacting with it much more often, much more deeply. It's our kind of lens onto information and digital data. So it's dangerous if that gets captured. So regulations that come from that perspective, I think the idea is correct, but from our perspective, we think a much better way of doing that than regulation is openness and transparency, and the kind of decentralized space with its sort of analogies with open source and the way that it can generally fund open source development and provide business models for open source provides a better way, in our opinion, of solving that problem than trying to regulate against it. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, the actual kind of instantiation of regulation broadly seems to be that competitive angle. So you get people who are able to lobby, and they're able to set the regulations, typically pulling the ladder up behind them. They've been able to build these amazing products, and nobody else can now because they're subject to regulations that are very expensive to meet. to provide information that a small organization simply can't do because they don't have the people or the resources to do it. So I think we're in danger of hitting that kind of end state, and we're seeing it in a lot of the legislation that comes up, even when it originates in a kind of well-meaning place. But I think we solve that with open source. We don't solve it with these regulations which will get captured.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely brilliant point. Like the entrenchment of incumbents through the use of regulation is happening right before our very eyes right now. And we've got to fight back against that. You know, we all think that like, well, I think that Zuckerberg or Zuck is like this knight in shining armor with like Llama 3.1, but there's a different play going on there, which is to capture us into the model in a different way through the way that they've monetized their business so many times over the years. So let's not be fooled. We have to have these models that are separate to no matter who the institution is that can be proliferated and separated from these central institutions. I mean, we break the rules all the time with what we do. So we're literally breaking terms of service every day. There's somebody's asking me hard questions about regulation. We typically don't stray into like GDPR regulation, but we do break terms of service consistently with platforms. And the way that I sleep at night justifying that is because I think that walled gardens should be broken down. And the perpetuation of walled gardens doesn't help this broader, fairer economy unfold where interests become aligned. You can't access the Twitter API now, not because it makes Twitter money to monetize the API. It's because it gives them an edge over everyone else building Grok. That's not in our interest.
Thank you. So we'll close with this call to action to break the walls, to open AI again. Thank you so much to fantastic speakers, and thank you to the audience.
Thank you.
Thanks.